The dust of the trail hung heavy in the air as the afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the barren stretch of road leading to Riverside, Colorado. The year was 1875, and the promise of gold and opportunity had drawn countless souls westward, though fate had been crueler to some than others. Gemma Blackwell lay crumpled at the roadside, her once fine dress now tattered and soiled. Her delicate hands raw from days of walking after the stagecoach had departed without her taking with it the last of her possessions and her final hopes of starting anew. 3 days without food had left her weak, her vision blurring as she stared down the empty road. The distant sound of hoofbeats seemed almost a hallucination, a cruel trick of her starving mind. But as the sound grew louder, Gemma forced herself to sit upright, summoning what little strength remained in her fragile body. Ezekiel Xavier rode tall in the saddle, his weathered hat pulled low to shield his eyes from the relentless sun. At 28, he had already lived several lifetimes' worth of experiences. His calloused hands and the faint scar along his jawline testaments to the harsh realities of life on the frontier. His keen eyes spotted the figure by the roadside long before he reached her, a crumpled heap of dusty fabric that might have been mistaken for discarded belongings, if not for the slight movement that betrayed human presence. He pulled gently on the reins, slowing his chestnut mare to a halt beside the woman. Her face was streaked with dirt and dried tears, but beneath the grime, he could see she was young, perhaps in her early 20s, with features that might once have been described as lovely before hunger and desperation had hollowed her cheeks and darkened the skin beneath her eyes. "Miss." Ezekiel called, dismounting in one fluid motion. "Are you hurt?" Gemma's parched lips parted, but no sound emerged. She had spent the last of her tears hours ago when the final traveler had passed her by without stopping, despite her desperate pleas. "Water," she finally managed, the word barely a whisper. Without hesitation, Ezekiel unhooked his canteen from his saddle and knelt beside her, gently supporting her head as she drank. She gulped frantically at first until he pulled the canteen back slightly. "Easy now," he cautioned. "Too much at once will make you sick." As she sipped more slowly, Ezekiel reached into his saddlebag and withdrew a small cloth-wrapped bundle. Inside was a loaf of sourdough bread, still fresh from his visit to Riverside that morning. "When's the last time you ate, miss?" he asked, breaking off a small piece of the bread. 3, maybe 4 days, Gemma replied, her eyes fixed on the food with painful intensity. Ezekiel's jaw tightened. He'd seen his share of suffering, but the abandonment of a young woman to starvation struck something deep within him. He handed her the piece of bread, which she accepted with trembling hands. "Small bites," he instructed gently. "Your stomach won't take kindly to too much at once." As Gemma took her first tentative bite, a single tear escaped down her cheek, not of sorrow this time, but of overwhelming relief. In that moment, something shifted in Ezekiel's chest, a feeling he hadn't experienced in years. He'd offered her bread to satisfy her hunger, but something else passed between them in that simple act of kindness, something neither of them could have anticipated. "My name's Ezekiel Xavier," he said, his voice softer than usual. "Most folks just call me Zeke. My ranch is about 5 miles from here. Can you tell me your name, miss?" "Gemma," she replied between careful bites. "Gemma Blackwell." "Well, Miss Blackwell, I can't rightly leave you out here. Once you've had enough to eat and drink, I'd like to take you to town. The doctor should have a look at you." Gemma's eyes, though exhausted, flashed with momentary fear. "I have no money. I can't pay a doctor." Zeke waved away her concern. "Doc Williams is a good man. He won't turn away someone in need." He paused, studying her face. "If you don't mind me asking, how did you come to be out here alone?" Gemma swallowed the last of her bread before answering, her voice slightly stronger now. "I was traveling to Denver. My aunt lives there, and after my parents died of fever last winter, she was the only family I had left." She looked down at her tattered dress. "I had enough money for the stagecoach fare, but we stopped for the night in a small settlement 2 days back. While I slept, someone took my bag with all my belongings. The driver wouldn't believe that I'd paid for passage to Denver," he said. Her voice faltered. He said I could pay in other ways if I was desperate enough to continue the journey. Ezekiel's expression darkened, his hand involuntarily tightening into a fist at his side. "And so you refused and they left you here." She nodded, unable to meet his eyes. "I thought I could walk to the next town. I didn't realize how far it would be." "Riverside is still about 8 miles from here," he said, glancing at the sun's position. "And there's nothing but open country in between." Gemma's shoulders slumped further, the brief surge of energy from the food already fading. "Miss Blackwell," Ezekiel said, his decision already made, "I'm going to help you up onto my horse and we're going to ride into town together. You need a doctor's care, a proper meal, and a safe place to rest. After that, we'll figure out how to get you to your aunt in Denver." "Is that agreeable to you?" For the first time, Gemma looked directly into his eyes, searching for any sign of deception or ulterior motives. She found only genuine concern and something else, a steadiness that made her feel for the first time in days that she might be safe. "Yes," she whispered. "Thank you, Mr. Xavier." "Just Zeke," he corrected, offering his hand to help her stand. "Nobody calls me Mr. Xavier except the bank manager, and that's only when I'm late on a payment." The ghost of a smile touched Gemma's lips as she accepted his hand, attempting to stand. Her legs, weak from hunger and exhaustion, buckled immediately. Without hesitation, Ezekiel caught her, his strong arms supporting her slight frame with ease. "I'm sorry," she murmured, embarrassment coloring her cheeks. "Nothing to apologize for," he replied, his voice matter of fact. "Been a few days since I carried a lady, but I reckon I remember how." Before she could protest, he lifted her gently, one arm supporting her back, the other beneath her knees. She was alarmingly light, and he could feel her bones through the thin fabric of her dress. The protective instinct that had first stirred when he spotted her at the roadside grew stronger. He carried her to his horse, a well-trained mare named Penny who stood patiently waiting. "This is Penny," he explained as he carefully settled Gemma in the saddle. "She's the gentlest horse you'll ever meet." Once Gemma was securely seated, Ezekiel took the reins and began leading the horse on foot, walking beside them toward Riverside. "You don't have to walk," Gemma protested, though she lacked the strength to dismount even if she wanted to. "Been sitting in that saddle since dawn," he replied with a shrug. "Feels good to stretch my legs." As they made their way along the dusty road, Ezekiel kept a careful eye on Gemma, ready to catch her should she begin to fall. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the prairie grass, and in the distance, the first buildings of Riverside began to appear on the horizon. "Tell me about your ranch," Gemma said softly, trying to distract herself from the pain and weakness that still gripped her body. Ezekiel glanced up at her, surprised by the question. Most people didn't show much interest in his modest operation. "It's nothing fancy," he began. 60 acres, most of it grazing land. Got about 30 head of cattle, some chickens, 2 horses including Penny here, and the orneriest mule God ever created." A smile touched his lips. "Named him congressman on account of how stubborn he is." The comment drew a genuine laugh from Gemma, though it quickly turned into a cough. Ezekiel immediately passed her the canteen again. "It sounds wonderful," she said after taking a sip. "Is it just you there?" "Just me and the animals," he confirmed. "Had a ranch hand last summer, but he headed to California when the weather turned cold. Can't say I blame him." "Colorado winters aren't for the faint of heart." "And your family?" Gemma asked, then immediately regretted the question when she saw his expression shift subtly. "Lost my pa to a mining accident when I was 16, he answered after a moment. "Ma passed 3 years later, pneumonia." He adjusted his hat, his eyes fixed on the horizon. "Got a sister in St. Louis, married a banker, they have 2 little ones now." "I'm sorry," Gemma said softly. "About your parents." Ezekiel shrugged, but his response was gentle. "Been a long time now, but I'm sorry about yours too." "Fever's a hard way to go." They fell into a companionable silence as Riverside grew closer. The town was modest but thriving, with a main street lined with the essential businesses of frontier life. A general store, a blacksmith, a small hotel, the doctor's office, and of course, a saloon, which seemed to be doing the most business as the workday came to an end. As they approached the outskirts of town, Gemma became increasingly aware of her disheveled appearance. Her once fine dress was now dirty and torn, her hair a tangled mess, and she knew her face must be streaked with dirt and signs of her ordeal. "Perhaps," she said hesitantly, "it might be better if we waited until dark to enter town. I don't wish to be seen like this." Ezekiel stopped walking and looked up at her directly. "Miss Blackwell, there's not a person in Riverside who'd think less of you for what you've been through. And those who might aren't worth your concern." The certainty in his voice gave her courage, and she nodded, though she still felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment as they continued into town. True to Ezekiel's word, the few people they passed offered sympathetic nods rather than scornful glances, though Gemma could feel curious eyes following them to the doctor's modest office at the end of the main street. Dr. Samuel Williams was just finishing with his last patient of the day when Ezekiel knocked on the door. The doctor, a man in his 50s with kind eyes and prematurely white hair, took one look at Gemma and ushered them inside. What happened? He asked Ezekiel as he helped Gemma into the examination room. "Found her by the roadside about 8 miles out," Ezekiel explained. "Stagecoach left her behind. She's been without food for days." The doctor's expression was grim as he began his examination, checking Gemma's pulse and looking into her eyes. "You're suffering from exhaustion and malnutrition, young lady, but I don't see any permanent damage. You're fortunate Mr. Xavier found you when he did." "Can I get her a room at the hotel?" Ezekiel asked. "She needs proper rest." Dr. Williams shook his head. "The hotel's full up with a mining company delegation from Denver, but Sarah Miller over at the boarding house likely has a room." He looked at Gemma thoughtfully. "Though in your condition, miss, you might be better off with someone looking after you for a day or two." Before Gemma could respond, Ezekiel spoke up. "I have plenty of room at my place. She'd have privacy and proper meals." Gemma's eyes widened at the suggestion. While Ezekiel had shown her nothing but kindness, the propriety of staying unchaperoned at a bachelor's ranch was questionable at best, scandalous at worst. Dr. Williams seemed to read her thoughts. "Mrs. Abernathy, the preacher's wife, has been looking for help with her new baby. Perhaps she could use an extra pair of hands for a few days in exchange for room and board." "I wouldn't want to impose," Gemma began, though the thought of having to work immediately when she could barely stand filled her with dread. "You need rest," Ezekiel insisted, his voice firm. "Not child-care duties." The doctor looked between them, then sighed. "Tell you what, I'll send word to Martha, that's my wife, and she can come stay with you at Ezekiel's place for a night or two. That way you get the rest you need and the town gossips don't get any ammunition." He smiled kindly at Gemma. "Martha's a fine cook, too. She'll have you feeling better in no time." Relief washed over Gemma's face. "That's very generous of you, Dr. Williams, and of your wife." "Martha loves nothing more than fussing over people," the doctor said with a fond shake of his head. "Now, let me give you something to help with those aches, and then we'll get you settled." While the doctor prepared a mild pain tonic, Ezekiel stepped outside to arrange for a wagon to transport Gemma to his ranch. When he returned, he found her sipping the medicine, her face already showing the slightest improvement as the tonic began to ease her discomfort. "The wagon will be here shortly," he informed her. "And I've sent word to Martha Williams. She'll meet us at the ranch." "Mr. Xavier Zeke," Gemma corrected herself. "I don't know how to thank you for all this. I have nothing to offer in return." Ezekiel's expression softened as he looked at her. "Sometimes folks help each other because it's the right thing to do, not because they expect something in return. That's how it works out here. Has to be, or none of us would survive." As the wagon arrived outside the doctor's office, Ezekiel carefully helped Gemma to her feet. Though still weak, she found she could walk with his support, her body responding to the nourishment and care she had received. The ride to Ezekiel's ranch was quiet, with Gemma drifting in and out of sleep, lulled by the rocking of the wagon and the effects of the doctor's tonic. Ezekiel drove with a careful gentleness, avoiding the worst of the ruts in the road to spare her any unnecessary discomfort. As they approached the ranch, Gemma roused herself enough to take in her surroundings. The main house was modest but well-maintained, with a wide porch and sturdy construction that spoke of care and attention. A small barn stood nearby, along with a chicken coop and a corral where several cattle grazed peacefully in the evening light. "It's lovely," Gemma murmured, earning a surprised glance from Ezekiel. "It's not much," he replied, "but it's home." By the time they arrived at the house, Martha Williams was already there, having ridden out ahead of them in her husband's buggy. A plump, cheerful woman in her 40s, she greeted them with the efficiency of someone accustomed to emergencies. "I've put fresh sheets on the bed in the spare room," she announced, helping Ezekiel support Gemma into the house. "And I've got a stew simmering that'll put some color back in those cheeks." With Martha's help, Gemma was soon settled in a small but comfortable bedroom. The older woman helped her wash and change into a clean nightgown that Martha had brought along, exclaiming over Gemma's state with motherly concern. "Leaving a young woman alone on the road like that," Martha muttered as she helped Gemma into bed, "should be a law against such things." "Now you rest, dear. I'll bring you some broth in a bit, nothing too heavy for that empty stomach of yours." Left alone for the first time since Ezekiel had found her, Gemma sank into the softness of the bed, tears of gratitude stinging her eyes. Just hours ago, she had been certain she would die alone by that dusty road. Now she was safe, cared for, and surrounded by kindness from strangers who asked nothing in return. As exhaustion overtook her, her last conscious thought was of Ezekiel's face as he had handed her that first piece of bread the moment when survival had once again become possible. In the kitchen, Ezekiel sat at the table while Martha bustled about, ladling stew into bowls. "Samuel told me how you found her," Martha said, setting a bowl before him. "That poor girl could have died out there." Ezekiel nodded grimly, his appetite suddenly diminished despite the delicious aroma of the stew. "I've been thinking about what she said about the stagecoach driver. That kind of man shouldn't be responsible for passengers." Martha's expression grew knowing. "She's a very pretty young woman once you look past the effects of her ordeal." Ezekiel felt his ears grow warm. "That's not why I helped her." "Of course not," Martha replied, though her smile suggested she wasn't entirely convinced. "You're a good man, Ezekiel Xavier, always have been." She ladled some broth into a smaller bowl. "I'm going to take this to our patient. You eat your stew before it gets cold." As Martha disappeared down the hall, Ezekiel found himself staring after her, his thoughts a confusing jumble. He had acted on instinct when he found Gemma, doing what any decent person would do. Yet he couldn't deny that something about her had stirred feelings he had long since buried, feelings he wasn't entirely sure he wanted to resurrect. Shaking his head, he turned his attention to his stew. There would be time enough to sort through his emotions later. For now, Gemma Blackwell needed to heal, and he had a ranch to run. That was all that mattered. The night passed peacefully, with Martha checking on Gemma several times to offer sips of water and broth. By morning, some color had returned to the young woman's cheeks, and though she was still weak, her eyes were clearer, more alert. Ezekiel had risen before dawn, as was his habit, to tend to the morning chores. When he returned to the house, he found Martha preparing breakfast, the smell of coffee and bacon filling the kitchen. "How is she?" he asked, washing his hands at the pump by the sink. "Better," Martha replied. "She's awake and asking for you actually, seems eager to thank her rescuer properly." Ezekiel dried his hands on a towel, suddenly aware of his work-worn appearance. "I should probably clean up a bit first," Martha's eyes twinkled. "There's hot water on the stove, and I laid out a clean shirt on your bed." "You didn't have to do that," he protested, though he was grateful for her thoughtfulness. "Consider it payment for letting me boss you around in your own home," she replied with a chuckle. A few minutes later, freshly washed and wearing the clean shirt, Ezekiel knocked gently on the door to the spare room. "Come in," Gemma called, her voice stronger than it had been the day before. He entered to find her sitting up in bed, her long dark hair brushed and neatly braided, Martha's doing, no doubt. In the morning light streaming through the window, he could better appreciate the delicate beauty of her features, now that some of the strain had eased from her face. "Mrs. Williams tells me you're feeling better, he said, suddenly awkward in her presence. Gemma nodded, a small smile touching her lips. Thanks to you, I don't think I properly expressed my gratitude yesterday. You saved my life, Mr. Xavier. Zeke, he reminded her gently. Zeke, she amended. I owe you a debt I can never repay. He shook his head, taking a seat in the wooden chair beside the bed. You don't owe me anything. I'm just glad I came along when I did. Mrs. Williams mentioned that you're planning to help me get to Denver, Gemma continued. That's too much to ask. I've imposed on your kindness enough already. It's no imposition, Ezekiel insisted. There's a supply wagon heading to Denver next week. The driver, Henry Fulton, is a friend of mine. He'd be happy to take you along. Gemma's face fell slightly at the mention of the week-long wait. I don't want to be a burden on you for so long. Ezekiel leaned forward, his expression earnest. Miss Blackwell, Gemma, you're not a burden. The ranch is quiet most days. Having company is nice. He hesitated, then added, besides, Doctor. Williams was clear that you need at least a few days of rest before attempting another journey. She studied his face, searching for any sign of reluctance or obligation, but found only sincerity. Very well, she agreed finally, but I insist on helping around the house once I'm stronger. I won't simply lie here while you and Mrs. Williams wait on me. Ezekiel smiled, relieved. I'm sure we can find some light duties for you once you're up to it. Nothing too strenuous, he added quickly. Doctor's orders. Martha appeared in the doorway, carrying a tray with a bowl of porridge and a cup of tea. If you two are done negotiating, I have breakfast for our patient. As Martha set the tray across Gemma's lap, Ezekiel rose to leave. I should get back to my chores. The cattle won't feed themselves. Thank you again, Gemma called after him, for everything. He paused in the doorway, turning back with a small smile that transformed his weathered features. You're welcome, Gemma. The next few days established a gentle routine at the ranch. Martha returned to town after the second day, once it was clear that Gemma was recovering well and could manage on her own. Despite Ezekiel's protests, Gemma insisted on taking over simple household tasks, starting with preparing meals and tidying the main rooms of the house. I've never been idle in my life, she told him when he found her kneading bread dough on the third morning, and I find I don't much care for it. Ezekiel had to admit that her presence had brought a pleasant change to the ranch. The house, always neat but somewhat sparse, now felt more like a home. Fresh wildflowers appeared in a jar on the table, curtains that had remained closed for years were opened to let in sunlight, and the aroma of home-cooked meals greeted him when he returned from working with the cattle. More than the physical changes, though, was the comfort of companionship. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch, watching the sunset paint the Colorado sky in spectacular colors while sharing stories of their lives. Ezekiel found himself talking more than he had in years, telling Gemma about his childhood in Missouri, his father's decision to move west after the war, and the struggles and triumphs of building the ranch from nothing. In turn, Gemma shared her own history, her upbringing in a small Pennsylvania town, her father's work as a schoolteacher, and her mother's talent for creating beautiful garments that were sought after by the ladies of their town. I learned to sew watching her, Gemma explained one evening, her fingers automatically mimicking the motion of a needle and thread. She always said a woman with a needle and thread would never go hungry. Is that what you plan to do in Denver? Ezekiel asked. Work as a seamstress. Gemma nodded. My aunt owns a dress shop there. She wrote after my parents died, offering me a position. She has no children of her own, and I think she hopes I might take over the business someday. She looked out at the darkening landscape, her expression thoughtful. It's a good opportunity. Better than anything available in Pennsylvania. Ezekiel found himself strangely disappointed by the reminder that her stay was temporary, that soon she would continue on to Denver to begin her new life. The realization surprised him. He had lived contentedly alone for years, never feeling the absence of companionship until now when he faced its imminent loss. Your aunt will be worried, he said finally, not having heard from you. Yes, Gemma agreed, guilt crossing her features. I should write to her, let her know I'm safe and that I'll be arriving soon. I'll take your letter to town tomorrow, Ezekiel offered. "It can go out with the mail coach." They fell silent again, each lost in their own thoughts as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. The distance between them on the porch bench seemed both too great and not great enough, a physical manifestation of the growing connection neither was quite ready to acknowledge. The following day, Ezekiel rode into Riverside with Gemma's letter, along with a list of supplies they needed from the general store. The town was busier than usual, with several wagons parked outside the hotel and men in city clothes conversing on the boardwalk. "Mining company executives still in town?" Ezekiel asked Tom Bennett, the postmaster, as he handed over Gemma's letter. Tom nodded, accepting the envelope. "They're buying up claims along the river, offering good money too. Old man Peterson sold his worthless plot for $500 yesterday." Ezekiel whistled low. "That's a lot of cash for land that's never produced a speck of gold. They seem to think there's more there than meets the eye," Tom replied with a shrug. "Speaking of which, word is you've got a young lady staying at your place. Doc's wife has been singing her praises all over town." Ezekiel felt his ears grow warm. "She was in trouble. I helped her out, that's all." Tom's knowing smile suggested he wasn't convinced. "If you say so, Zeke. But Martha Williams says she's a real beauty, now that she's got her strength back." Eager to change the subject, Ezekiel paid for the postage and headed to the general store. As he was selecting the items on his list, he overheard a conversation that made him pause. "I'm telling you, Pete, it was the same girl," a gruff voice insisted. "Pretty little thing with dark hair, refused to pay her way proper-like, so we left her. Now I hear she's shacked up with some rancher outside town." Ezekiel set down the sack of flour he'd been examining, his attention fully captured by the man's words. Turning slowly, he found himself facing two men, one tall and thin with a drooping mustache, the other shorter with a bulbous nose that spoke of a fondness for whiskey. "You the driver who left a young woman alone on the road to Denver?" Ezekiel asked, his voice deceptively calm. The shorter man eyed him suspiciously. "What's it to you?" "I'm the rancher she's shacked up with, as you put it," Ezekiel replied, taking a step closer. "Found her half dead from starvation because of you." The man's companion shifted uncomfortably. "Now, Fred, maybe we should..." "Should what?" Fred interrupted. "Apologize for not giving free rides to every pretty face that bats her eyelashes." She knew the deal. "Wasn't my fault she was too high and mighty to pay her way." Ezekiel's hands clenched into fists at his sides, his jaw tightening as anger coursed through him. "She had already paid for her ticket. You tried to take advantage of her after her belongings were stolen," Fred sneered. "Says her. Convenient story, ain't it? And mighty convenient for you too, getting yourself a pretty little..." He never finished the sentence. Ezekiel's fist connected with his jaw with enough force to send him sprawling into a display of canned goods which crashed to the floor around him. "Zeke." Mr. Abernathy, the store owner, hurried over as Fred struggled to his feet, blood trickling from his split lip. "What in tarnation? This man abandoned a young woman on the road with no food or water," Ezekiel explained, his voice tight with controlled fury. "Left her to die because she wouldn't submit to his advances." A murmur ran through the store, which had quickly filled with curious onlookers. Among the crowd was Sheriff Davis, who pushed his way forward with a weary expression. "Fighting in the store again, Zeke. Thought you outgrew that sort of thing?" "This isn't some barroom brawl, Sheriff," Ezekiel replied, still glaring at Fred. "This man should be charged with endangering a passenger's life." The sheriff looked between the two men, then sighed. "Fred Wilkins, isn't it? You drive for the Central Stage Company?" Fred touched his bleeding lip gingerly. "Yes, sir, and I didn't do nothing wrong. Company policy says no ticket, no ride." "The lady had a ticket," Ezekiel insisted. "Her belongings were stolen while staying at a way station." "Convenient claim," Fred muttered. Sheriff Davis raised a hand to silence further argument. "Mr. Xavier, I appreciate your concern for the young lady, but without evidence of wrongdoing, there's not much I can do officially." His expression softened slightly. "That said, I'm inclined to believe your version of events, given Mr. Wilkins's reputation." Fred's companion tugged at his arm. Come on, Fred, let's get out of here. As the two men slunk toward the door, the sheriff turned to Ezekiel. I'll have a word with the stage company manager. Make sure they understand that leaving passengers stranded isn't acceptable, regardless of the circumstances. He paused, then added more quietly, How is she doing? The young lady? Better, Ezekiel replied, his anger gradually subsiding. She's recovering her strength. The sheriff nodded. Good to hear. You did the right thing helping her. Though maybe next time try using words before fists, eh? He clapped Ezekiel on the shoulder before following Fred and his companion out of the store. Mr. Abernathy approached with a broom, surveying the mess of canned goods with a resigned expression. Don't suppose you'd help clean this up before finishing your shopping? Ezekiel nodded, already bending to gather the scattered cans. Sorry about the disruption, Josiah. No harm done, the store owner replied, beginning to sweep. Between you and me, Fred Wilkins has had a thumping coming to him for some time. Just wish it hadn't happened in my store. By the time Ezekiel had finished his errands and headed back to the ranch, the afternoon was well advanced. As he approached the house, he was surprised to see Gemma in the garden, carefully watering the few vegetables that grew there. She looked up at the sound of hoofbeats, shading her eyes against the sun, a smile spreading across her face as she recognized him. The sight of her, healthy and seemingly at home on his land, stirred something in Ezekiel that he had long since given up hope of feeling again. In just a few days, she had transformed not only his house but something within himself as well, awakening emotions he had buried after too many disappointments and losses. I was beginning to worry, Gemma called as he dismounted. You were gone longer than expected. Ezekiel hesitated, unsure whether to tell her about the confrontation in the store. Got held up in town, he said finally, leading Penny toward the barn. Gemma followed, setting down her watering can. Is everything all right? You seem troubled. He sighed, realizing she would likely hear about the incident from others if he didn't tell her himself. I ran into the stagecoach driver, the one who left you on the road. Gemma's eyes widened. Fred Wilkins, he's in Riverside. Ezekiel nodded, surprised she remembered the man's name. He and his partner were at the general store. They were talking about you. A flush spread across Gemma's cheeks. What did they say? Nothing worth repeating, Ezekiel replied, his jaw tightening at the memory, but I may have expressed my displeasure with their actions. Understanding dawned on Gemma's face. Ezekiel Xavier, did you hit that man? Despite his lingering anger, Ezekiel couldn't help but smile at her tone somewhere between scandalized and impressed. He had it coming. Oh, Zeke, Gemma sighed, though there was a hint of a smile on her lips. You shouldn't have risked getting in trouble on my account. Sheriff Davis agreed with me, more or less, Ezekiel assured her. Said he'd speak to the stage company about their policies. Gemma's expression softened and she reached out to touch his arm, a gesture of gratitude that sent warmth spreading through him. Thank you for defending my honor, even if it was perhaps a bit dramatic. You're welcome, he replied, suddenly aware of how close they were standing. Though I should apologize too. Gossip travels fast in small towns. I'm afraid our arrangement here might be the subject of some talk. Gemma withdrew her hand, a shadow crossing her face. I hadn't considered that. I wouldn't want to damage your reputation. My reputation. Ezekiel laughed softly. I've lived alone on this ranch for years. People already think I'm odd. A bit of gossip won't change much. He paused, then added more seriously, but I am concerned about how it might affect you, especially when you reach Denver. Gemma considered this, her brow furrowed in thought. My aunt is not one to give much weight to gossip, and the truth is simple enough. You rescued me from a desperate situation and offered me shelter while I recovered. She smiled, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. Once I'm gone, the talk will die down quickly enough. The reminder of her imminent departure fell between them like a stone, creating ripples of unspoken regret. Ezekiel busied himself with untying the packages from Penny's saddle, avoiding Gemma's gaze as he fought to master the unexpected surge of emotion. I got those thread and needles you mentioned, he said, changing the subject, and some fabric if you still wanted to work on mending those clothes. Gemma brightened at the mention of sewing supplies. "Oh, that's wonderful. My dress is beyond repair, I think, but your shirts could use some attention. I noticed several missing buttons and torn seams." Ezekiel rubbed the back of his neck, embarrassed. "Never been much good with a needle." "Buttons come off. I usually just switch to another shirt until there are none left, then do my best to fix them all at once." "Well, now you have me," Gemma replied, then blushed as she realized how that sounded. "I mean, I'm happy to mend them for you, while I'm here, that is." An awkward silence fell between them, filled with things neither quite knew how to express. Finally, Ezekiel handed her the package containing the sewing supplies. "I should finish the evening chores," he said. "Would you mind starting dinner? I bought some fresh beef from the butcher in town." "Of course," Gemma replied, grateful for the change of subject. "I'll make that stew you enjoyed the other night." As they parted ways, Gemma to the kitchen, and Ezekiel to the barn, both were acutely aware of the growing connection between them, and the limited time they had to explore it before Gemma's journey to Denver would separate them, perhaps forever. The week passed with surprising speed, each day bringing Gemma further from the brink of starvation and closer to full health. With her recovery came an increasing involvement in the daily life of the ranch. She insisted on taking responsibility for the household tasks, preparing meals, mending clothes, and even helping with the vegetable garden that had been somewhat neglected in Ezekiel's bachelor existence. For his part, Ezekiel found himself looking forward to returning to the house after a day's work, drawn by the promise of companionship and conversation. He began taking Gemma on short rides around the property, showing her his favorite spots: the creek where he fished on quiet Sundays, the ridge that offered views all the way to the distant mountains, and the small apple orchard that produced enough fruit for pies throughout the winter. On these excursions, they would talk for hours, sharing stories and dreams, discovering the many ways in which their different upbringings had nonetheless led them to similar values and perspectives. Ezekiel found himself captivated not just by Gemma's beauty, which grew more evident as health returned to her cheeks, but by her resilience, intelligence, and quiet determination. Gemma, too, was increasingly drawn to the taciturn rancher. Beneath his reserved exterior, she discovered a man of principle and depth, whose kindness extended not just to humans in distress, but to every creature under his care. She watched how gently he treated his horses, how he knew each of his cattle by their markings, and how he always found time to scratch the barn cats behind their ears when he thought no one was watching. As the day of her departure approached, an unspoken tension began to grow between them, a reluctance to acknowledge the inevitable separation that neither was quite ready to face. It was Gemma who finally broached the subject, 3 days before the supply wagon was due to depart for Denver. They were sitting on the porch after dinner, watching the fireflies begin to emerge in the gathering dusk. Ezekiel had just finished telling a humorous story about his first attempts at breaking a particularly stubborn horse, and Gemma's laughter lingered in the air between them. "I'll miss this," she said softly when the laughter faded. "These evenings on the porch, your stories." Ezekiel's hands stilled on the piece of wood he'd been whittling. "Denver has porches too, I expect," he replied, though his attempt at lightness fell flat. "It won't be the same," Gemma said, looking out at the land that had begun to feel like home in so short a time. "I never expected to feel settled here. After everything that happened, I thought I would be counting the days until I could leave, continue to Denver." Ezekiel set aside his knife and the half-carved figure of a horse. "And now," Gemma turned to face him, her eyes reflecting the last light of the setting sun. "Now I find myself counting the days for a different reason, dreading them rather than anticipating them." His heart quickened at her words, hope rising despite his efforts to temper it. "Gemma," he began, then faltered, unsure how to express the tumult of emotions she had awakened in him. "I know it's foolish," she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "We've known each other such a short time. And I have obligations to my aunt, who's been counting on my arrival." She twisted her hands in her lap, a gesture of nervous uncertainty. "But I can't help feeling that leaving you would be a mistake." Ezekiel reached across the space between them, taking her hands in his. "Then don't go," he said simply. "Stay here, with me." Gemma's eyes widened at the directness of his proposal. "Zeke, are you asking?" "I'm asking you to give us a chance," he clarified, his voice gaining strength as he committed to the path he'd been contemplating for days. "I know it's sudden. I know there are practical considerations, but what's grown between us this past week, it's rare, special." He squeezed her hands gently. "At least it is to me." "To me as well," Gemma admitted, color rising in her cheeks. "But my aunt, write to her," Ezekiel suggested. "Explain the situation. Invite her to visit, even. If she's your only family, surely she would want to know you're happy and well cared for." Gemma's expression wavered between hope and uncertainty. "And the town gossips, what would they say about me staying here unchaperoned?" A smile touched Ezekiel's lips. "Well, we could solve that particular problem easily enough." Her breath caught as his meaning became clear. "Are you proposing marriage, Ezekiel Xavier?" "I suppose I am," he replied, surprising himself with the certainty he felt. "Not very romantically, I'll admit. No ring, no bended knee. But with complete sincerity." His expression grew serious. "I'm not a wealthy man, Gemma. This ranch is modest and the work is hard, but it's a good life, and I think we could be happy here together." Tears glistened in Gemma's eyes, but her smile was radiant. "When you found me on that road, I had nothing, no possessions, no hope, barely even life itself. You gave me bread to satisfy my hunger, but in doing so, you also began to heal an emptiness I had carried much longer." She freed one hand to touch his cheek gently. "You offered your heart along with that bread, whether you knew it or not, and somewhere along the way I gave you mine in return." Ezekiel turned his face to press a kiss to her palm, his heart full to bursting with a joy he had never expected to feel. "Is that a yes, Gemma Blackwell?" "It's a yes," she confirmed, laughing through her tears. "Though my aunt will be terribly surprised to receive a wedding announcement instead of my arrival. We could wait," Ezekiel offered. "Give her time to travel here for the ceremony if you'd like." Gemma considered this, then nodded. "That would be best, I think, and it would give us time to become better acquainted as betrothed." She blushed at the word, still hardly believing the turn her fortune had taken from abandoned and starving to engaged in the span of little more than a week. As if reading her thoughts, Ezekiel said, "I know this is fast. If you need more time, no," Gemma interrupted firmly. "I've had more than enough time alone with my thoughts these past days. I know what I want, Zeke. I want this life, this land." Her voice softened. "I want you." The confession hung in the air between them, charged with emotion that had been building since that first moment on the dusty road. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, Ezekiel leaned forward. Gemma met him halfway, and their lips touched in a kiss that was both tender and full of promise, the first of many they would share in the years to come. When they finally parted, the stars had emerged fully overhead, painting the Colorado sky with diamond light. Ezekiel kept hold of Gemma's hand, unwilling to break the connection between them even for a moment. "I should write to my aunt tonight," Gemma said after a comfortable silence. "The supply wagon leaves in 3 days, and I want to give her as much notice as possible." Ezekiel nodded. "And I should speak to Reverend Abernathy tomorrow, see when he might be available for a wedding once your aunt arrives." The practical considerations of their decision brought another wave of joyful disbelief to Gemma. Just days ago, she had been certain of death. Now she was planning a wedding to a man who had captured her heart with an act of simple kindness that had revealed the true nature of his character. "What are you thinking?" Ezekiel asked, noting her thoughtful expression. "I'm thinking about bread," she replied with a small smile, "and how sometimes the simplest gifts can change the course of a life entirely." Ezekiel's answering smile was tender. "In that case, I'm grateful for every loaf I've ever baked." Their laughter mingled in the night air, the first of countless moments of shared joy that would fill the ranch house with warmth and love in the years to come. The news of Ezekiel and Gemma's engagement spread through Riverside with the speed that only small town gossip can achieve. By noon the following day, a steady stream of visitors began arriving at the ranch. ostensibly to welcome Gemma to the community, but primarily to satisfy their curiosity about the young woman who had so quickly captured the heart of the town's most eligible, if somewhat reclusive, bachelor. Martha Williams was among the first to visit, bringing a basket of preserves and a knowing smile. "I told Samuel from the very first day that you two were destined for each other," she declared, settling comfortably at the kitchen table while Gemma poured coffee. "He owes me a new hat for doubting me." Ezekiel, who had reluctantly been drawn into the kitchen by Martha's insistence, raised an eyebrow. "You were placing bets on us." Martha waved away his mock indignation. "Not bets, dear. Friendly wagers between husband and wife keeps the marriage lively." She turned her attention to Gemma. "Now, about the wedding, I assume you'll want to wait for your aunt to arrive from Denver." Gemma nodded, somewhat overwhelmed by Martha's enthusiastic planning. "Yes, I wrote to her last night. The letter will go out with tomorrow's mail coach. I'm hoping she can make the journey within the next few weeks." "Perfect," Martha declared. "That gives us just enough time to prepare. You'll need a proper dress, of course. I'm thinking something in blue to match your eyes." "That's very kind of you," Gemma began, "but I wouldn't want to impose." "Nonsense," Martha interrupted. "The whole town will want to help. It's been ages since we had a proper wedding to celebrate. Sarah Miller's daughter got married last spring, but they moved to California right after, which hardly gave us time to enjoy the occasion." Ezekiel caught Gemma's eye over Martha's head, his expression a mixture of amusement and apology. She smiled back, finding that she didn't mind Martha's enthusiastic interference as much as she might have expected. After the loneliness that had followed her parents' deaths, being welcomed so warmly into a community was a gift she hadn't anticipated. The day continued in a similar fashion, with various townspeople stopping by to offer congratulations and, in many cases, advice. By evening, when the last visitor had finally departed, Gemma collapsed onto the porch bench with a sigh of exhaustion. "Is it always like this?" she asked as Ezekiel joined her, handing her a cup of tea. "No," he replied, settling beside her. "Usually it's just me and the cattle, and they're much less talkative." Gemma laughed, leaning slightly against his shoulder. "They mean well, I know. But I had no idea our engagement would cause such excitement." "Riverside doesn't get much news," Ezekiel explained. "A stagecoach robbery or a particularly good harvest is usually the most excitement we see in a year. An unexpected romance between a mysterious Eastern lady and the local rancher. That's the sort of story that will be told for generations." "Is that how they see me? Mysterious?" Gemma asked, amused by the characterization. Ezekiel considered her question. "I think they see someone who survived hardship with grace and who brings light wherever she goes." His voice softened. "At least, that's how I see you." Gemma's heart swelled at his words. Though their courtship had been unconventional and brief, she found herself increasingly certain of their connection with each passing day. Ezekiel might not express himself with flowery phrases or grand gestures, but his steady presence and quiet devotion spoke volumes. "I should finish those shirts I was mending," she said after a comfortable silence. "Especially if we're to have more visitors tomorrow." Ezekiel nodded, though he made no move to rise. "I've been thinking about the house," he said instead. "It's always been enough for me, but with two of us and maybe someday—" He trailed off, a hint of color touching his cheeks. "I thought we might add another room or two. There's good timber on the north end of the property." The casual mention of their future family sent a pleasant warmth through Gemma. "I'd like that," she replied, "though the house is perfectly lovely as it is." "It's better with you in it," Ezekiel said simply. The days that followed settled into a new routine, with Gemma fully integrating into life at the ranch. She insisted on learning about the various aspects of running the property, following Ezekiel as he tended to the cattle, helped birth a calf, and repaired fences damaged in a recent storm. In the evenings, they would plan for their future together, discussing everything from potential improvements to the house to how many children they might wish for. 10 days after Gemma had sent her letter to Denver, a response arrived. She opened the envelope with trembling hands, Ezekiel standing supportively at her side. "She's coming," Gemma announced after scanning the contents, relief evident in her voice. She writes that she's delighted by the news, if somewhat surprised by the speed of events. She'll arrive on the stagecoach next Thursday. Ezekiel squeezed her shoulder gently. That's wonderful news. We should prepare the spare room for her. Gemma nodded, still reading. She says she's bringing some of my mother's things that she saved after they passed, including her wedding dress. Her voice caught slightly. She thought I might want to wear it. Ezekiel wrapped an arm around her shoulders, drawing her close. Are you all right? Yes, Gemma assured him, wiping away a stray tear. It's just, I wish they could be here, my parents. They would have loved you. And I would have been honored to know them, Ezekiel replied softly. But I believe they're watching over you still, over us. Gemma leaned into his embrace, finding comfort in his steady presence. I believe that too. The following week was a flurry of preparations. Martha Williams organized a group of women from town to help clean the house from top to bottom, while Reverend Abernathy visited to discuss the ceremony and offer premarital counseling. Ezekiel, with the help of several neighboring ranchers, began work on an addition to the house, a wedding gift that would give them more space for the future they both envisioned. When Thursday arrived, Ezekiel hitched the wagon to drive into town and meet Gemma's aunt at the stagecoach station. Gemma, too nervous to sit still at the ranch, insisted on accompanying him. What if she doesn't like me? Ezekiel asked as they approached Riverside, only half joking. I didn't exactly court you in the traditional manner. Gemma squeezed his hand reassuringly. Aunt Alina is practical above all else. She'll care that you're kind, hardworking, and that you make me happy, which you do immeasurably. The stagecoach arrived precisely on schedule, dust billowing as it pulled to a stop before the station. Several passengers disembarked, among them a slender woman in her 50s, dressed in a practical traveling suit, her gray streaked hair pulled back in a neat bun. Aunt Alina, Gemma called, waving to catch her attention. The older woman's face lit up at the sight of her niece. She hurried forward, arms outstretched, and Gemma stepped into her embrace. My dear girl, Alina murmured, holding Gemma at arm's length to examine her. You look well. Better than I expected after what you described in your letter. Thanks to Ezekiel, Gemma replied, turning to include him in the conversation. Aunt Alina, this is Ezekiel Xavier, my fiancé. Ezekiel removed his hat, suddenly aware of his work-worn appearance beside Alina's city polish. It's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Miss Blackwell, Alina corrected with a small smile, but please call me Alina. She studied him with keen eyes that reminded him of Gemma's. So you're the young man who rescued my niece and promptly stole her heart. I assure you, madam, it was entirely mutual, Ezekiel replied, finding his voice. Your niece is the most remarkable woman I've ever known. Alina's expression softened. Well, at least you have good judgment. She glanced around at the small town. So this is Riverside. Gemma writes that you have a ranch outside of town. Yes, madam. It's not large, but it's productive. We raise cattle primarily with some crops for our own use. Alina nodded, her assessment continuing. And you intend to make your home there, raise a family. That's our plan, Gemma confirmed, taking Ezekiel's hand. I know it's different from the life I might have had in Denver, but it's what I want. For a moment, Alina's composed facade cracked, revealing the concern beneath. It's a hard life, ranching, especially for women. I'm stronger than I look, Gemma replied gently, and I won't be alone. We'll face the challenges together. Alina studied their joined hands, then looked up at Ezekiel once more. Do you love her, truly love her, enough to put her happiness before your own, if necessary? The directness of the question might have flustered another man, but Ezekiel met her gaze steadily. I do, with all my heart, and I'll spend every day proving it to her and to you if you'll give me the chance. A long moment passed as Alina weighed his words. Finally, she nodded, seemingly satisfied. Well then, I believe I'd like to see this ranch of yours and perhaps discuss wedding plans. I assume there's room in your wagon for my luggage. The tension broken, they set about loading Alina's trunk and carpet bag. As they drove back to the ranch, Alina gradually relaxed, asking questions about the land and sharing stories of Gemma's childhood that made her niece blush and Ezekiel laugh. By the time they reached the ranch, the sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the yard where the new addition to the house was taking shape. "Your building?" Alina asked as Ezekiel helped her down from the wagon. "A wedding present," he explained. "2 more rooms and a larger kitchen." Alina nodded approvingly. "Forward-thinking, I like that in a man." Inside the house, Martha Williams had prepared a welcoming dinner, the table set with the best dishes Ezekiel owned, which, Gemma had discovered, were surprisingly fine pieces inherited from his mother. "Miss Blackwell, we're so pleased to welcome you to Riverside," Martha greeted Alina warmly. "I'm Martha Williams, the doctor's wife. I've been helping Gemma prepare for your arrival." "It seems my niece has made quite an impression on this town," Alina observed, accepting the cup of tea Martha offered. "Oh, indeed she has," Martha confirmed with a smile. "We couldn't be happier that she's decided to stay. Ezekiel has been alone too long, and Gemma brings such warmth to the place." The evening passed pleasantly, with conversation flowing easily among them. As Martha prepared to leave, promising to return the following day to discuss wedding preparations, Alina declared herself exhausted from the journey. "If you'll show me to my room, I think I'll retire for the night," she said, stifling a yawn. Once Alina had been settled in the spare room, soon to be relocated to the new addition, Gemma and Ezekiel found themselves alone on the porch, as had become their custom. "She likes you," Gemma said, nestling against Ezekiel's side as they watched the stars emerge. "You think so?" Ezekiel asked, not entirely convinced. "She asked some pointed questions about my intentions." Gemma laughed softly. "That's just Aunt Alina's way. If she didn't approve, believe me, you'd know it. The fact that she's agreed to stay for the wedding is the surest sign of her blessing." Ezekiel relaxed, pulling Gemma closer. "Then I suppose we're officially moving forward with our plans." "We are," Gemma confirmed, tilting her face up to his. "In 2 weeks, I'll be Mrs. Ezekiel Xavier." The name, spoken aloud for the first time, sent a thrill through both of them. Ezekiel lowered his head to capture Gemma's lips in a tender kiss, sealing the promise that had begun with a simple act of kindness on a dusty Colorado road. The wedding day dawned clear and bright, the late summer sky a perfect blue canvas unblemished by clouds. In the 2 weeks since Alina's arrival, preparations had transformed the modest ranch into a venue worthy of the occasion. Neighbors and friends from Riverside had contributed everything from flowers to food, turning the event into a community celebration. In the main bedroom of the house, now temporarily converted into a bridal chamber, Gemma stood before the small mirror as her aunt made the final adjustments to her mother's wedding dress. The gown, a simple but elegant creation of ivory satin with delicate lace accents, had been carefully altered to fit Gemma's slightly taller frame. "Your mother would be so proud," Alina said softly, securing the last of the tiny pearl buttons that ran down the back of the dress. "You look exactly as she did on her wedding day." Gemma blinked back tears, not wanting to spoil the careful application of rouge that Martha had insisted upon. "Do you think they'd approve of Ezekiel of this place?" Alina turned Gemma to face her, her expression unusually tender. "Your parents wanted nothing more than your happiness. They would see, as I do, that you found it here with this man who cherishes you." She reached up to adjust a strand of Gemma's dark hair, which had been arranged in soft curls beneath a crown of wildflowers. "Besides, your father always said you had good judgment. He would trust your choice." A knock at the door announced Martha's arrival. "The guests are all seated," she reported excitedly, "and Ezekiel is waiting with the Reverend beneath the arch. Oh, Gemma, you look absolutely radiant." With a final deep breath to steady her nerves, Gemma took her aunt's arm, ready to begin the next chapter of her life. Outside, the yard had been transformed into a wedding garden. 2 rows of chairs borrowed from the church in town faced a simple arch constructed of branches from the property, woven with wildflowers and ribbons. Neighbors and townspeople filled the seats, turning to watch as Gemma emerged from the house on her aunt's arm. At the front, Ezekiel waited, looking uncharacteristically formal in a new black suit, his usually unruly hair neatly combed, his face freshly shaven. But it was his expression that caught Gemma's heart, the look of wonder and devotion as he watched her approach, as if he couldn't quite believe his good fortune. As Alina placed Gemma's hand in Ezekiel's, the older woman's voice was thick with emotion. "Take care of each other," she said simply, before taking her seat in the front row. Reverend Abernathy's ceremony was brief but heartfelt, speaking of love's endurance through hardship, of partnership in all things, and of the blessings that come from opening one's heart to another. When it came time for the vows, Ezekiel's voice rang out clear and steady, his eyes never leaving Gemma's face. "I, Ezekiel James Xavier, take you, Gemma Elizabeth Blackwell, to be my lawfully wedded wife. To have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part." Gemma's response, though softened by emotion, was equally firm, a commitment made not in haste but with complete certainty. As Reverend Abernathy pronounced them husband and wife, Ezekiel's kiss was both tender and profound, a promise that needed no words to express its depth. The celebration that followed lasted well into the evening, with food and dancing and more than a few tears of joy. Alina, who had initially planned to return to Denver immediately after the wedding, announced her intention to stay another week. "The dress shop can manage without me a little longer," she declared, "and I'd like to see the addition completed before I leave. Perhaps I could even help with the furnishings." As the last guests departed and twilight deepened into night, Ezekiel and Gemma found themselves once more on the porch of what was now their shared home, this time as husband and wife. "Happy, Mrs. Xavier?" Ezekiel asked, his arm wrapped securely around her waist. "Completely," Gemma replied, leaning into his embrace. "It's strange to think that just a month ago I was on that road, certain my life was ending, and now it's just beginning," Ezekiel finished for her, "our life together." As they stood there in the gathering darkness, the future stretching before them like the vast Colorado sky, Gemma reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. From the depths of despair beside that dusty road to the height of joy in Ezekiel's arms, her path had been unexpected but ultimately blessed. And it had all begun with a simple act of kindness, a piece of bread offered to a stranger in need, accompanied by the gift of a heart that had found its perfect match in her own. In the years that followed, the Xavier Ranch flourished under the care of its devoted owners. The addition to the house was completed before winter set in, providing ample space for the family they both hoped to create. Alina returned to Denver as planned, but with a promise to visit regularly, particularly after receiving news that her presence would be required for the birth of her grandniece or nephew the following summer. The Stagecoach Company, following an investigation prompted by Sheriff Davis's report, dismissed Fred Wilkins and implemented stricter policies regarding passenger safety. The incident, though painful at the time, had led not only to Gemma and Ezekiel finding each other, but also to improved conditions for travelers throughout the territory. Riverside continued to grow, benefiting from the increasing settlement of the Colorado frontier. Ezekiel, with Gemma's encouragement, took a more active role in town affairs, serving on the school board and later as a respected voice on the town council. On the first anniversary of their meeting, not their wedding, but the day Ezekiel had found Gemma beside the road, they established a tradition of baking fresh bread together, a reminder of the simple gift that had changed both their lives. "To bread," Ezekiel would toast, raising a slice still warm from the oven. "And hearts freely given," Gemma would reply, her eyes reflecting the same love that had grown only deeper with each passing day. Their first child, a son they named James after Ezekiel's father, arrived exactly as Alina had predicted, in the summer following their wedding. He was joined 2 years later by a daughter, Elizabeth, named for Gemma's mother. Both children grew strong and happy on the ranch, learning the value of hard work, the importance of kindness, and the power of love to transform lives. On quiet evenings, when the children were asleep and the day's work was done, Ezekiel and Gemma would often sit on the porch, watching the sun set over the land that had become their shared legacy. In those moments, they would sometimes speak of that first meeting, marveling at the twist of fate that had brought them together. "You ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't taken that particular road that day?" Gemma asked once, her head resting on Ezekiel's shoulder. "I prefer to think it wasn't chance," he replied, his hand finding hers in the gathering darkness. "Some things are meant to be even if the path to them isn't easy. Like a starving woman and a kind-hearted rancher," Gemma suggested with a smile. "Exactly like that," Ezekiel agreed, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Some might call it luck, I call it providence." As twilight deepened into night and the first stars appeared overhead, they remained on the porch, content in each other's company, and in the life they had built together, a life founded on a simple act of compassion that had blossomed into a love strong enough to weather any storm the frontier might bring. And in the years that followed, whenever travelers passed through Riverside, they might hear the story of the Eastern lady and the rancher who found love in the most unexpected of circumstances, a tale that began with hunger and ended with fulfillment, proving that even in the harsh realities of the frontier, the human heart's capacity for love remained the greatest strength of all.